Hello and welcome to The Dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to do The Decline of Western Storytelling Part 3. So in Part 1, which I did quite some time ago, that was dropped back into the Sweet Baby Inc. controversy. Although they are back again, so that controversy hasn't really ended. But anyway, I talked a lot about representation in video games and media and stuff. In Part 2, I talked a lot about two different shows. One was The Acolyte, which of course was terrible. The other was a show called Parasite the Grey from Korea. And I kind of wanted to do the same thing today. But today we're going to have a little more structure, and we're specifically going to be talking about the girl boss phenomenon. But unlike a lot of people who just want to complain about it, I want to give some constructive criticism. Because I can't help but notice that the Koreans have their own version of the girl boss, and they managed to do it right. Oh, so I should also apologize. I'm kind of sick, so I'm currently sucking on a throat lozenge. So if you hear it clicking on my teeth, hopefully it's not too distracting. But, it's that or my voice is just going to die in like 15 minutes, and nobody wants that, especially me. Anyways, so I guess by way of introduction, how did I come to the whole Korean television thing, or K-dramas as they're just collectively known? It kind of started with Squid Game, and I think before that, I was essentially unaware of Korean television. If you were like, hey Rob, do you think Korea has TV shows? I'd be like, yeah, I guess. Never thought about it. I assumed they like to watch TV, why not, Then Squid Game happened, and of course, like everybody else on earth, I ended up watching it. And I thought it was really good overall. I was a little late to watching it, so a lot of the plot twists had already been spoiled for me. By the way, we're going to have spoilers for mostly for two shows, one called My Name and one for Hotel de Luna. So there's going to be a lot of heavy spoilers. I will try to not give away the endings to either one, but there will be a bunch of spoilers, obviously. And I'm probably going to have to go into quite a bit of depth because there were Korean shows that most people probably aren't going to be familiar with. But the whole point is I want to talk about the things the Koreans are doing well, the things we're doing badly, and how we can learn from them and adapt. So like I said, the girl boss thing has been talked about by a bunch of people. I'm not the first one to talk about this, but I do have some helpful suggestions, hopefully, which will hopefully make this video worth watching. If nothing else, it can be kind of a case study in what's gone wrong. So usually when you talk about the girl bosses, I was telling you how I came to Korean television. Obviously, like I said, through Squid Game. And then about a month after I watched Squid Game, I was on vacation, and I finished watching one show, can't remember what it was, and I was just kind of bored. So I was just on YouTube for hours and hours just watching fight show clips, from like the Raid Redemption, the Raid Part 2, Ong Bak, and a bunch of John Wick stuff, Born series, just a bunch of my favorite fighting clips. Man of Tai Chi, a bunch of that stuff, right? And after thoroughly destroying my YouTube homepage for, so now I was getting nothing but fight stuff. At some point, I got a thumbnail for a show I'd never heard of called My Name. And it just said some cute Asian girl on the thumbnail. And she was covered in blood. And she had a knife tied to one hand with cloth hanging down, right? And I thought that looked kind of intriguing. Not just because she was cute, of course, but also just because, lots of blood and violence, right? So I decided to click on that. And sure enough, it did have a bunch of fight clips, but it was actually a fan-made video set to, I think it might have been Unstoppable, but it might have been Rise or Survivor. I don't know. They're all kind of the same song in my mind. Anyways, a fan-made video to one of those, right? And I thought, well, those fight scenes look pretty cool. I've never seen this show. I'll give it a shot. And I just thought it was a movie, but it turned out it was an 8-episode television show. But it was on Netflix, so I'm like, okay, that's easy. So I watched it, and I thought it was really, really good. It was like this weird reverse undercover cop story. Basically, our main girl, Jiwoo, her dad is a member of this drug cartel, and he's on the run because the police are after him, right? But he decides to risk coming home for his daughter's birthday to come see her, and he gets ambushed by some masked assassin who guns him down in the hallway right outside the door. In fact, she's even looking through the keyhole and sees it happen. It's all traumatic and stuff, right? So she tries going to the police, but the police are like, "Oh no, drug cartel guy's dead. Wow, what a shame. We'll totally get right on top of this one. We're going to devote lots of manpower and resources to solving this case. Top priority." So obviously that's going nowhere. But the gun does turn up, and it turns out to be what appears to be a police service revolver with the serial number just like grinded off with a grinder, right? So at her dad's funeral, a bunch of the cartel guys showed up, and she decides to go to the cartel for help since the police aren't helping. And the cartel give her a new name and identity, and they enroll her in the police academy. So she ends up going through all the training, graduates, and becomes a cop, but of course secretly working for the cartel, because it's not like they're just helping out of the kindness of their hearts or anything, right? And what we end up getting is a show with a ton of action, great fight scenes, but also a lot of emotional depth. Because Jiwoo is kind of caught between like being a gangster and being a cop. And she starts getting like really betrayed by both sides, you know, and having to deal with dirty cops, but also dealing with the cartel. And she's, you know, meanwhile, she's investigating the police to find out who killed her dad. But one of the cops starts getting suspicious of her because he can't help but notice that, you know, ever since New Girl over there joined the team, information seems to be leaking out. I wonder how that's happening, you know? And it set up this really tense, kind of like weird investigation. Like if anybody's ever seen No Way Out with Kevin Costner and Gene Hackman, it kind of had a bit of that feel. Not quite as strong, but it had some of that. But then just combined with lots of fight scenes and lots of action and a really cool emotional story. And this is the thing that I thought was really missing compared to a lot of the Western girl boss type of characters. Because Jiwoo does have a lot of the same type of characteristics of the girl boss. Right? She's kind of snarky. She's cold and kind of emotionally distant. She's kind of rude and hard to get to trust people and stuff. She can be quite unlikable at the beginning of the story. But a lot of this is just like this suit of armor that she wears to hide her pain. And as the story goes on, you see these things start to break down. We see her start to try and connect with her partner a bit and trying to open up to him and trying to figure out if she can even trust him or not. She starts finding out things about the cartel that aren't necessarily good either, right? And this whole emotional journey of like, do I really want to be a cartel member? Do I really want to be a cop? Like, does having some dirty cops invalidate the entire institution? You know, how far can I really trust these people? Because now that she's getting betrayed by both sides, and she kind of has to navigate her own like independent path as the investigation goes on, you know? And the actress Han So-hee is mostly known in Korea as this like dramatic actress. She does a lot of, you know, like drama and melodrama type roles, right? Not really a lot of action stuff. But for this show, she's like, you know what? If I'm going to do an action show, I'm going to do the show. She like learned how to ride a motorbike for the part. She spent all this time studying like fighting and stuff at the Action Center. It's just called in Korea, right? Where lots of movie actors and actresses go to like learn how to, you know, do fight scenes realistically and convincingly, right? At one point, they wanted to film her workout, and they were like, hey, you know, we want to put that in the show. Would it be okay? And they were thinking she was just going to do a few like sit-ups or crunches or push-ups. Meanwhile, she's like hanging upside down doing crunches with like a weight hanging off her and stuff, right? And she's like, no, like you guys can actually film me working out. Like I kind of thought this is what I needed to do for the role anyway. Like, what are you talking about? I could have just been doing 3 push-ups. Ah, man, you know. But she was excellent. And because she threw her like everything into it, she was really convincing in the role. And I think one of the problems we have with a lot of the Western girl bosses, they tend to be very independent. And by that, I mean, they don't need anybody else, right? Whereas Jiwoo, she needs people to help her try to find her dad's killer. And then she's needed people to help her all through every stage of her journey. And even though she is kind of a loner and she is very isolationist at parts, the fact that we see her like struggle and fail and have to learn to trust people, especially her partner, and open up to him and to connect with people again. It's like the exact opposite arc of most of the girl boss stories. And I guess I really haven't defined what a girl boss is, but you probably know. It's like Captain Marvel and Galadriel from the Rings of Power and She-Hulk, obviously from She-Hulk. It's Batgirl from, was it a CW? I don't know. It was the one where, the same, we all be perfect when it fits a woman. That one. Yeah, you all know what it is. Naru from Prey. Oh, that is a movie that does not get anywhere near as much hatred as it deserves. That was a terrible show. Oh my goodness, the Predator franchise. It's like the Terminator franchise. We just kind of pretend nothing after 2 happened. Except with Predator, we sometimes pretend 2 didn't happen either. But usually 2's not bad. But yeah, we've had a slew of them. Like Terminator Dark Fate, speaking of Terminator. There's just been an avalanche of them. I recently tried to watch Ironheart. Yeah. I knew it was going to be bad, but it's kind of like when I watched The Room, there's that morbid curiosity of like, okay, but how bad is it really? It was bad. Point is, we've had a lot of these kind of shows. And like I said, like on the surface, Jiwoo fits a lot of those characteristics. She ends up beating a lot of men that are like twice her size, that realistically she probably couldn't beat. In some of the fights, she takes a ridiculous amount of damage and probably would not be able to keep going. Although, to be fair, a lot of men do the same thing in action shows, so it's alright. But we also see her lose fights. We see her lose to one of the villains, and he like just stabs her in the leg, like slowly too, and just pushes it in, right? And, we see her like break down and cry and be emotional and vulnerable. She's not this like perfect person who can never make a mistake and can never let her walls down, right? But we also see her be strong and triumphant and ultimately find her dad's killer and get her revenge, right? Anyway, that's enough about My Name. This isn't the show I most wanted to talk about. But anyways, after watching My Name, I talked to my brother on the phone and I was telling him about it because I figured he might really like the show. And he asked me if I'd ever seen the movie Parasite, which I hadn't seen back then. Obviously, I've seen it since then because I've, watched like 100 plus Korean shows the last 4 years or so. But just as soon as he said that, I was like, oh yeah, that show won Best Picture, And it suddenly clicked in my mind, like, there is something going on in South Korea. So I just started watching a bunch of shows. I found the Korean spy shows especially are just excellent. They kind of have this like Cold War era feel, but in modern day, because their enemies are North Korea and China, right? It is very relevant to South Korea, So, and of course, the North Korean thing is actually even more like emotional because you realize that a lot of these people have friends and family members just on the other side of the border that they haven't been able to see in like 60 years or whatever it's been, 70 years, whatever, right? And, that just makes it even more interesting and just adds more like depth and stuff to it. But along the way, one of the shows I discovered was a show called Hotel de Luna, starring an actress named IU. Her real name is like Lee Ji-eun, but her stage name is IU. Now, I didn't know who she was at this point, but it turns out that IU is one of the biggest pop stars in Korea. So she's a solo artist, she's a singer, songwriter, music producer, she's hosted television shows, she currently has her own show called Palette, where she just interviews other Korean singers and they sing songs together and stuff like that, and she interviews them and whatnot, right? But she's also an actress, and she actually just won Best Actress this year at the Blue Dragon Awards in Korea for her latest drama, When Life Gives You Tangerines. But although I will say I think personally, this is another tangent, in my opinion, her best show ever is My Mister, which somehow manages to combine like slice of life with corporate espionage. And when you think of those two things, slice of life stories tend to be slow paced, day-to-day things. They tend to be very relationship driven. And then corporate espionage is fast paced, betrayals. You can't, like it's the exact opposite of relation based. You can't trust anybody because you're just going to be betrayed at any time. And they somehow managed to merge these two things and made a phenomenal show. It's actually listed by IMDb as like one of the 100 greatest TV shows ever made. So I would say that was her best show. But she wasn't much of a girl boss there. She was more like a street criminal type kind. In this show, she was basically the preeminent girl boss. And in my opinion, one of the greatest female like iconic characters I've ever seen in my entire life. So much so that at this point, IU is literally my favorite actress on earth. It doesn't hurt that she's hot as well, but there's tons of hot actresses, so that on its own isn't enough. Anyway, so in Hotel de Luna, she plays this person named Jean Manuel, and Manuel is 1,300 years old. She's trapped between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and she runs this hotel, the Hotel de Luna, of course, which is basically a hotel for the dead. So their cosmology is like really basic in this show. If you're a good person, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. It's not more complicated than that. But they do sometimes have spirits that when the person dies, for whatever reason, their spirit can't let go of this world, right? Like maybe they got murdered or they got betrayed or they have some sort of powerful emotions that are interfering with their ability to let go of this world and move on to the next, right? And so the hotel exists to draw these evil spirits in towards the hotel. Because left on their own, they tend to become like evil spirits and poltergeists and revenants and all these other undead monster type of things. Many of which Manuel and the staff at the hotel have to deal with through the course of the show, of course. So the hotel is kind of, I've never seen Fantasy Island really. I was like super young when that was on TV. But I feel like the show kind of has the same vibe where a lot of the episodes are about different people who come to the hotel and then they have to figure out what's holding this person back from passing on to the other side and then resolve those issues with them, right? But a lot of the people, like a lot of the ghosts can't even really remember because the ghosts tend to be very emotion-based and a lot of times their emotions are clouded by whatever's holding them back. So there's a lot of like investigation and try to put the pieces together. It's kind of a mystery show in a lot of ways, right? And of course, obviously supernatural, a lot of fighting as well. And of course, there's also some romance. So I'm going to try not to overstate the romance, but we will be talking about that a bunch because I think this is one of the things that makes our Korean, like wounded queens, I've seen them called, different from the Western girl boss, is that they're not afraid to like fall in love and, love again. Whereas our Western women, they're strong, independent women who don't need no man. So, not much romance in them. Which is funny because if you're trying to have a female character and then you just have her act masculine in almost every way and you make her look as unfeminine as possible in many cases, then what was the point of making a female character if it was just going to be a man with breasts, The Korean ones are smoking hot and they dress phenomenally. Like, I think in the 16 episodes of Hotel de Luna, you wear something like, I think it was 112 different outfits. So that's like 9 outfits per episode. And I think it worked out to like 1 costume change for every 7 minutes of the show's runtime. Like not even her personal screen time, just for every 7 minutes of runtime, she has a different outfit throughout the entire course of the show. And she's hot in every single one of them, of course. Anyways, once again, getting sidetracked. But a lot of her journey is her just learning to forgive the people who wounded her in the past, and most importantly, herself. And as her story starts to go, we start to see all these different facets of her character. Because at the beginning, she is also very girl bossish. She's cold and arrogant and very cruel sometimes. But we also see, even from the very beginning, these moments of like tenderness or compassion when we don't really expect it. And it's kind of this unpredictability that kind of starts to make us a little interested in her character, even from the beginning. We also start to find out bits of her backstory. And we start to see why she is the way she is. So basically, when she was a mortal human 1,300 years ago, her and her brother were members of this like outlaw band, right? And like most outlaws, they're, raiding caravans and stuff like that. So at one point, they attacked this caravan, and it turns out, though, that the princess of the country they're in is in the caravan. And so is her fiance. I don't think he's a prince, but I'm just going to call him Prince because it's less syllables than fiance. I think he was actually like her guard captain or some bodyguard or something like that. But I think he was a noble as well. I can't remember. I'm probably getting some of the details wrong. Not important. The main feel of the show, okay, is much more important than the actual fine details. For anybody who has seen the show and you're like, wait, you're getting some of the stuff wrong. It's fine. We'll all live with it. Anyway, so They end up robbing the princess, but Ayu can't help but notice that Princess seems a lot more worried about the safety of her man there than she is about the jewels. So her and her brother end up getting separated from the rest of the tribe during the fight, and so the rest of the outlaws take off. But her and her brother manage to capture the prince, and they're like, "Well, let's just ransom him back to the princess," you know. So they think it's a great idea. So they're like traveling with him, and Ayu ends up like almost dying at one point because she steps into a sinkhole, and she has to throw the prince her sword, and he's like all like tied up, right? So he cuts his bonds, and then he takes off, and she's like still sinking into the sand, thinking she's gonna die. But of course, he comes back to save her with the horse because they only have one horse for the three of them. And I think her brother wasn't there yet. Actually, I think her and her brother were separated. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So he ends up saving her, and her brother catches up with them. The three of them are traveling together towards the hidden rebel base. And of course, during the course of their journey, him and Ayu kind of start to like each other, you know? And the brother actually starts to get along with him really well too. They start bonding together, and he can tell his sister's into this guy, and he's into her. And he's like, yeah, you know what? It's cool. So by the time they get to the base, they decide to just let the prince go and not even ransom him off, right? And so the prince decides to go back to the princess, but he doesn't want to marry her anymore because now he's got somebody else that he likes more. He's fallen in love with Manuel, right? Of course, the princess doesn't handle this very well, and you know, he's kind of reminded that he has a duty to his people. It's not just about him. He's got to think beyond himself. And the more he thinks about it, he's like, you know what? You're right. Like, sure, I might be in love with somebody else, but it isn't just about me. Like, I need to stop being selfish and put my people first, right? And, you know, it's like more of a political marriage, but even still, the princess really likes him, and you feel like he kind of likes her too. He's just kind of falling for someone else now, right? But he also feels like he owes it to Manuel to explain things to her in person. So he goes to the secret rebel base to go talk to her. But of course, the princess has him followed. And all the guards swoop in and arrest all the outlaws and drag them back in chains to the castle, including Ayu. And so they've got her in a prison cell. I keep interchanging Ayu and Manuel. Whatever. You know what I mean. So he comes to see her and try to explain that he didn't know this was going to happen and it's not his fault. But she won't even let him talk, right? She's just so angry, and she's like yelling at him and everything else and cursing his name and everything. And you can tell he just kind of reaches this point where he's like, you know what? Maybe this is for the best. Like, maybe instead of the two of us wishing we could be together even though we can't, maybe it's better to just make a clean break. And he's just like, yeah, you know what? You're right. I did use you. I did find your base and then betray you. You know, like, I'm marrying the princess. You think I was going to really marry you instead of her? Like, come on. Well, you know. And he just like totally like destroys her essentially. But the princess ends up executing all the outlaws, including her brother. And he kind of tries to stop her, but she's not hearing anything of it. But he does manage to save Manuel. And I think it's because the princess at this point, she knows that if she kills Manuel, then that's it between her and her potential husband here, right? It's not going to happen. So instead, they send her into exile. But of course, she does not go quietly to exile. Instead, she goes and prays at the shrine that her people have built to the goddess of vengeance and swears to her that she is going to get revenge on the woman that killed her people and the man that broke her heart and betrayed her and got her brother and all her people killed, right? And the goddess of vengeance hears her and answers her prayer. The only thing is, no half measures here, right? This isn't the goddess of reconciliation and forgiveness. This is the goddess of vengeance. So if you're going to swear an oath to get revenge, you do not back out halfway. You know where this is coming. So the night of the wedding, she goes to the castle, and most of the guards are like drunk and stuff from the wedding feast. The few that aren't, she like slits her throat and slips in because she's currently empowered by the goddess of vengeance, right? And she goes to the princess's chamber and finds the princess and literally just like kills her with one swing of her sword, just decapitates her. And then she steals her clothes and puts them on herself, including this giant like hat with this red veil, right? So when the prince comes in, he sees this woman in the veil. But he knows instantly that this is Manuel. And so he draws a sword and the two of them start fighting, right? And during the fight, she tells him what she's done, that she has like sworn this oath and everything, right? So they're fighting back and forth. And I like to think that he's probably the better fighter, but she's empowered by the goddess of vengeance. Maybe she was just girl bossing it a little, who knows? Either way, she wins the fight though. And then she goes to kill him, but she can't do it. But she's already told him what happened, right? And so the prince grabs her sword and impales himself on her sword and dies, telling her as he dies his final words that some oaths should never be broken. And I really like this moment because not only was it super impactful, and you just see the shock and horror on her face and as she realized what's happening and stuff. But there's also like this cool double meaning because obviously he's talking about her oath with the vengeance goddess and how that should not be broken. But I feel like he's also talking about his own oath to marry the princess. And that even though it's costing him his personal happiness, that it was probably for the best, right? He's putting his people first and duty and honor and all those other things, right? And this is one of the things I like about him. A lot of Western stories, we make the men like weak and emasculated and pathetic. And, this guy, he's a good fighter. He's strong. He's noble. He's got a lot of great qualities. Would I have married the princess after she murdered all these people? Probably not, but, that's on him at that point. But the point is you can understand where he's coming from. You can sympathize with his character in that position, even when you disagree with him. And that's what makes interesting, compelling stories. So, of course, she flees, but she didn't really fulfill her oath because she tried to back out. And so she is cursed to run the hotel. So 1,300 years later, she needs a new human manager for the hotel because most of the staff are all spirits and ghosts, right? But they always have a human because, like I said, the hotel exists in both worlds, and they kind of want him to be like their liaison between the world of the living and the world of the dead, right? It is pretty funny later because our manager guy, the main character, our main guy, I mean, she's technically the main character, but main guy, Chong San, I think his name was, he finds out that he was actually her third choice. And then at one point he gets mad and quits. And he's expecting her to kind of apologize and try to get him back kind of thing. But of course, she just goes straight on to her fourth choice and hires her instead. Although he comes back, so that we have number 3 and number 4, because half the other staff, they don't even call them by their names. They just call them by whatever their preference number was for who was going to be the new manager. There's a lot of really funny moments in the show. Manuel is very shallow and materialistic a lot of time. She's very wealthy, but she also just spends money like there's no tomorrow and just wastes it constantly on frivolous things. At one point, she takes the manager guy out shopping for jewelry and she buys rings for all 10 fingers. And then she's complaining to the woman in the store that she only has one neck, so she can only wear one necklace because wearing more than that is tacky. But the woman's like, well, actually, that's kind of the new trend these days. And she's like, I like that trend. Bring me more necklaces. The guy's just like, oh, man, come on, what are you doing, There's another scene, too, where, speaking of her wasting money, so she's got this garage with 30 or more, maybe, luxury sports cars, right? Lamborghinis, Ferraris, just everything, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars per car, And then later, she tells the main guy she doesn't even know how to drive, which turns out to not be true. She just didn't want to drive, so she wanted to force him into driving. So she does know how to drive. She just doesn't like to. Also, it turns out she can teleport, although it does seem to use a lot of her power. I will say, the magic in this show is not particularly well defined. She just kind of does whatever she needs to do to make things happen. Let's not look too deep into that part. But she does have a lot of powers. But that's okay. We'll talk about that in a moment too, right? When we start getting into the price of power in this show and her flaws and stuff, right? But so at one point, like I said, she's got all these cars, but she can't even drive them really. So the hotel's having all these financial problems, and main guy's just like, why don't you sell off all your cars? And she's like, sell my cars? I can't sell my cars. They're so beautiful. I have to have them. He's like, fine, keep your 3 favorites and sell the rest. And then later, one of the other goddesses, not the goddess of vengeance, but one of her sisters, sends him back in time 300 years to go save the hotel from financial ruin a different previous time. But she casts an illusion on him so he doesn't look the same. That way, that way they can explain her not recognizing him from 300 years ago kind of thing, right? So he goes in the past 300 years ago and finds out that she has this stable full of purebred Arabian race horses. But then it turns out she can't even ride a horse. And he's like, why do you have a stable full of race horses if you can't ride a horse? She's like, because they're beautiful and I have to have them. He's like, keep your 3 favorites and sell the rest. And both times he manages to save the hotel from financial ruin, so she doesn't actually have to sell everything off. But I thought it was hilarious that, 300 years and she has learned literally nothing. Just absolutely nothing. She's also incredibly jealous. There's one scene which is just awesome where she tries calling the main guy, but his phone's turned off. So she tries calling his roommate Sanchez instead. And she's like, Sanchez, I can't reach Chongsan. Do you know where he is? And he's like, oh, he's at the airport picking up his ex-girlfriend. And she's like, girlfriend? So she teleports right to his house, and he turns around and there she is. And he's like, hey, were you here this whole time? And she's like, Sanchez, I don't think I heard you correctly. Did he say girlfriend? And he's like, ex-girlfriend. Why? Why do you care? And she's like, I don't. I mean, he can date whoever he wants. It's not my business. Why would I care? I don't care. Besides, she's probably not even pretty. And he's like, actually, she's like, I didn't ask. Did I look like I was asking? No, I don't care. I mean, if you wanted to tell me, I guess. And he's like, I don't know, wait. I mean, she's not that pretty, right? And she's like, Sanchez? He's like, actually, she's smoking hot. And she's like, Sanchez, I don't think you're reading the room very well here. I'm saying she's not that pretty, right? Like, maybe she's a little pretty. And Sanchez's like, no, she is smoking hot. Like, even when she went to America to study, we're all like, what are you doing? You're going to let your girl go overseas? Like, you're never going to do better than her. And she's just like, trying not to show that she's all mad and jealous and trying to keep it in. And she's like, oh, foolish Sanchez. What are you saying here? She's all getting mad and angry. She was a great character. But then things get even more interesting when she meets the ex-girlfriend, and it turns out that ex-girlfriend is the reincarnation of the princess that killed her brother and all her people. Yeah. At one point, she tries to cast this evil curse on her and totally destroy the woman completely. And main guy has to stop her. She didn't even think bad about it. She did feel a little guilty, but she was gonna go through with it all the way. And main guy has to physically stop her. Like I said, she has a lot of negative qualities, but we also see her grow and change and get better, right? And a lot of her arc has to be her learning to forgive the guy who betrayed her 1,300 years ago and realize that even though she's still kind of in love with him, that it's okay and that she can move past it, right? Forgive the princess. Forgive ex-girlfriend and realize that ex-girlfriend might have the princess's face, but she's not the same person. This woman had nothing to do with what happened to your people 1,300 years ago. Now, it does help that ex-girlfriend gets a new boyfriend of her own, so now, Manuel doesn't have to worry about this girl being all after her man anymore, so that does help. Although it's funny because the new boyfriend turns out to be her brother reincarnated, so then she tries to actually break them up too, because she's like, there's no way I'm letting this vulture hag near my brother, but it all works out. But a lot of her journey is about forgiving others and forgiving herself. And we see all this growth and change and development as her character. Eventually, she meets a guy from 1,300 years ago, and she ends up forgiving him and actually escorts his soul to heaven. And what was supposed to be a one-way trip, she manages to make it back because she just loves new guy that much, Anyway, I made a list of things I want to talk about rather than just rambling forever, right? And I want to take a look at our Western girl bosses versus the Korean wounded queens. I should also mention, it's not like I use character in Hotel de Luna is some fluke. It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which is another phenomenal show on Netflix about a children's writer named Ko Moon Young. A lot of the same qualities. She has like antisocial personality disorder, so she has like actual mental health issues and stuff. But she has a lot of the same type of journey. She's just cruel and mean and kind of vicious and snarky and rude. But a lot of that is just hiding a lot of vulnerability inside, right? Another great example is Hong Hae-in in Queen of Tears. Another great one. This one's about a married couple who start going through some problems after they have a miscarriage and they want to get divorced. But her family are like literal billionaires. But so the husband and wife are kind of on the verge of getting divorced. Then the wife finds out she's dying of a brain tumor, so the husband doesn't want to divorce her, and he didn't actually tell her he was going to get divorced. He has like the divorce papers in hand, but he kind of has them hidden behind his back, and just as he's about to give them to her, he finds out about the brain tumor. So a lot of that kind of stuff is going on. But then in the background, you also have the villains who are trying to take over the company, and they've got like people they've spent like 25 years inserting into the company and helping to promote them into positions of power so they can betray the family all at once. So it had a lot of like corporate espionage stuff too, and a lot of thriller elements as well. It wasn't like all just romance or anything. Neither of these shows are really rom-coms. There is romance and there is comedy, but they're not like rom-coms, if you know what I'm saying. Anyways, so girl bosses versus wounded queens. The girl boss tends to be like built around image and competence, right? A lot of it is proven that they're just as good as the men or better, you know? Whereas our wounded queens are built around like emotional depth and a lot of inner wounds and turmoil. It's vulnerability as strength, and they're like powerful in different ways, right? They're like billionaires like Queen of Tears. They're successful millionaire authors like It's Okay to Not Be Okay. They're 1,300-year-old ghost sorceresses in Hotel de Luna that are basically a demigoddess at this point almost, right? But they're also like very tragic as well. So it's not about being better than the men, but it's more about like reconnecting with humanity and, that kind of stuff. I think in general, Western media treats like vulnerability, especially in women, as like a weakness, whereas Korea treats it more as this like key to development and even redemption in many cases, especially in IU's case, right? In Manuel's case. Western storytelling, you tend to be like strong because you don't need anybody else. You're already great, and the world just has to realize how great you always were. And that's the arc, is everybody else has to change, not you. Which tends to make for very bad storytelling, honestly. Korea, you're strong because you learn to heal and forgive and love and, accept your flaws and move on and become better. There's a lot of relational storytelling. Like, I think in the West, most of these people, they have like very shallow relationships, most of these girl boss type characters, They might have some friends, but we don't really see them ever like sacrificing for each other or anything deep, because that would involve invulnerability, or vulnerability, sorry. And we can't have that. Whereas a lot of the Korean ones, they're very, very relationship based, because it's usually the betrayals of your past and the trauma and your, relationships with like mothers or parents or whatever, right? That have built you into the person you are now. And it's overcoming these things and addressing them that allows you to like finally move on and become better. So they have actual character arcs. To speak more specifically about Manuel. So a lot of her power comes from her like pain, right? It's all connected. The fact that she has her sorcery and her magic and stuff is because she's this immortal creature tied to the hotel. And she's also trapped though by this as well, right? She can't seem to forgive herself. She can't move on. And she's just had 1,300 years of bitterness and self-hatred and regret, just building and building and building and building, which is part of what's made her this jaded and, like I said, often cruel individual that we see at the beginning of the show. But she's also very multifaceted, right? She can be arrogant, but she can also be funny. She can be tender. She can be cruel. She can just be like all these different things. And it's like the Rubik's Cube, where like each side is just another aspect of her personality. But none of it's ever really like makes her unrealistic. It all works to make her just a more interesting and complex, even if messy, kind of person. Um, Her arc is about redemption instead of like domination, for example. And obviously, a lot of our Western ones tend to be very tied to ideology, especially feminism, of course, right? Whereas the Eastern storytelling, they're not really trying to do that at all. And by the way, I'm not saying Korea doesn't have feminists. They do. Ever hear the 4B movement? Those women are crazy. But anyway, the point is that their stories aren't really trying to push an ideology. They're trying to push good entertainment is what they're usually trying to do. So a lot of the Western shows, like I said, their like victory comes through power by beating their enemies and proving that they're the best, proving that they're strong and capable and everything else, right? A lot of it is very external. In Korea, especially in the case of Manuel, her power is her burden, and a lot of her victory comes through internal struggles. Like, yes, there's a lot of external stuff too. Like I said, she's fighting monsters and supernatural beings and stuff. She's investigating different cases, trying to figure out why this ghost can't let go and move on to the other world. She's trying to save a tiger spirit, or was it yeah, I think it was a tiger, yeah, and get him back home to China. Because why not? And but a lot of her stuff is internal. She has external challenges, and internal ones as well, right? I'm just gonna take a drink. Characters like Captain Marvel, Galadriel. Honestly, Galadriel, I feel bad putting her in this category. She definitely falls into the girl boss trap. But I feel like she's somebody who could have been good if they would have had better storytelling. Like, a lot of her story should be about her trying to avenge her brother and stuff like that. But it's all external. She needs to prove that Sauron's back just so she can prove she was right all along, right? She needs to get revenge on him for killing her brother. But there's no like internal struggle of, her trying to like deal with self-doubt or anything else. She knows Sauron's got to be back. There's never a question in her mind. There's no internal conflict at all. And what could have been an interesting character just ended up falling flat. In fact, I'll say the same thing about Captain Marvel too now I think about it. Because in the comics, Captain Marvel is nowhere near as bad as she was in the movies. She kind of has this like imagine if you had Superman, but with survivor's guilt. That's basically Captain Marvel, right? She's got all his power. She's basically like a low-tier cosmic being, like the Silver Surfer and other people in that category, And yet, for all her power, she can't always save the people around her, right? People she cares about dies, or she fails to do different things, right? Or she fights other cosmic beings that are even more powerful than her, and then she loses, kind of thing, And so in the comics, she's often had arcs where she's had to struggle and deal with that kind of stuff. She's been like basically an alcoholic at different points in the comics, And it's because she's had to deal with a lot of this kind of like inner guilt and turmoil, which we never saw any of in any of her movie appearances, really. And like I said, it's a shame because it's another character where if you would have like just shown her be vulnerable and open up, like these are the kind of moments that make us connect to a character when we see them like pushed almost to the breaking point, and we want them to like pick themselves up and keep going and to find a way to win, This is what really draws us in and makes us fall in love with these characters. And so when you never have those moments, we never really connect with them like that. It's just like, oh, she's strong and she's tough and she beats somebody up. Like half of like, I'm going to use Star Wars as a great example since everybody's seen it, But like a lot of Luke's struggle with Darth Vader in the, 4, 5, and 6, it's not really even about them fighting each other with lightsabers, right? In 5, Luke just isn't prepared. He isn't ready. He's fighting Vader, and Vader is just toying with him. Vader could have killed him at any point, you know? And then finally Luke gets one lucky shot, catches Vader in the arm, and Vader just gets mad and chops Luke's hand off, you know? Like, he could have done that anytime he wanted. But he just didn't want to because it's his son, and he still wants to tempt him, try to bring him to the dark side, you know? And a lot of the whole climax of that movie, it isn't about the lightsaber fight. It's about Vader revealing Luke's true parentage to him, and Luke having to suddenly deal with the realization that the biggest enemy in the entire galaxy, I guess other than Palpatine, is my father, right? It's the emotional and inner struggle. And by Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, when they have their fight, now it's about like Palpatine trying to tempt Luke to come to the dark side. And again, we do have this external battle of them lightsaber dueling, but the real conflict isn't what's happening on the screen. It's what's happening inside them. And so few of our stories seem to understand that these days, and it's really frustrating. So I guess to sum things up, I have some other notes here. I have power without cost, which is kind of Captain Marvel, right? She kind of gets her powers, and then she's just the most powerful. And she actually is kind of like blocked from realizing how powerful she is. And the climax of the movie is her realizing she's even more powerful. Versus power with a price. Because like I said, in Ayu's case, her power comes from the fact that she's bound to the hotel. But that's also her burden. That's her jail, essentially, right? She can like leave it, but she can never like move past it, I guess you could say, right? She's always drawn back to the hotel because she just doesn't have a choice, right? In fact, what's really interesting, this is going to be a heavy spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this, maybe skip ahead like 30 seconds. Anyways, the real kicker at the end is it turns out she wasn't actually bound here by the goddess of vengeance. She's actually been bound by her own guilt and shame and regret. And it's really like this, her feeling unworthy and feeling like she deserves to suffer and be punished for all eternity is what's actually been binding her here this entire time. And if she could have just learned to forgive herself earlier, she could have left at any point, but she just never could, right? So anyway, obviously we've got like the relationship to vulnerability. We see Ayu be strong and powerful and glorious and just like gorgeous and just like this almost like perfect immortal being. But we also see her crying when her brother dies. We see her getting petty and jealous and vengeful at the sight of the guy's ex-girlfriend. And, you know, we see her having to struggle with that and learn to forgive her too. We see her break down and cry when, you know, if things don't go her way with the man she likes. We also see her be like cruel and cold to him, to his face, but then secretly behind his back, like risks her life fighting other creatures that are basically as powerful as her almost to try to save him and protect him, you know? She's just a very deep and interesting character instead of this flat piece of wood, you know? I guess, obviously you've got way more emotional range and tone. You know, Captain Marvel, She-Hulk, all these girl bosses. There's very little depth because they're never allowed to be vulnerable. They're never allowed to lose. They're never allowed to break down and cry and open up to people. They're never allowed to be dependent. They're never allowed to be saved. You know, you can't have the man save the damsel in distress anymore, you know? Whereas in Hotel de Luna, there are times when Ayu saves main guy, but there's also times when he has to save her, sometimes from herself, you know? I'm just going to grab another throat lozenge because I can already tell my throat is starting to regret not having one already. Anyways, like I said, often having to save her from herself. But the point is that they aren't afraid to say like, hey, you know what? She can be strong and powerful and she can save the guy. And by the way, the guy can also be cool and he can be awesome. You know, he's not some like weak, pathetic guy who can't do anything right. But, you know, like I said, we can also see her stumble and fall, right? Anyway, so the arc, You've got like assertion, I was the best all along, and now everybody else just has finally come around to realize it, versus transformation, where the character honestly has to grow and change and, you know, experience regret, remorse, forgiveness, etc., and finally earn her redemption. It's the idea that if you don't struggle for something, it just doesn't feel earned. And so many of our Western girl bosses, Galadriel's already the best. Captain Marvel's already best. She-Hulk can already control her rage better than the Hulk, because she's used to it, because she gets catcalled by construction workers, or because men explain things to her. When has the Hulk ever had to deal with traumatic things like that? I mean, sure, he saw his mom get murdered by his dad right in front of his eyes, but, what's that compared to getting catcalled, right? Why would he know anything about dealing with anger? Anyway, point is that, like, all these girl boss characters are already the best. There is no transformation. There's no growth. And because of that, there's no character arc. And it just makes them dull and uninteresting, boring characters. And then combined with the fact that they tend to be kind of snarky and rude and abrasive, there's just nothing there to like. Whereas, at least, even with the Korean women, even when they are being snarky and rude and abrasive, even from the beginnings of the show, when 90% of the time they're like that, we start seeing these little gaps in the armor. We start seeing the moments where they're starting to regret it. And then we start finding out what's made them this way. And, it just makes for a way more interesting and dynamic storytelling. So anyway, that's going to be the video. Like I said, Hotel Del Luna was a great show. I use a great actress. I really enjoyed It's Okay to Not Be Okay as well. Maybe I'll just talk about the beginning of that show really briefly, because it has one of the most fascinating intros I've ever seen in any television show ever. So as I said, this is the one about the children's book author, and she writes like illustrated books for like young kids, like 3, 4, 5 years old kind of thing, right? And they're all kind of these Grimm's fairy tale type of stories. So they are kind of dark. The art style she uses in all her books is very like, I was going to say Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's more like Caroline, actually, if anybody's ever seen that show. And ironically, you can actually buy the books on Amazon. Like, they made all the books for the show, and then people wanted to buy the books, so they actually just produced the books. Anyway, so the beginning of the show basically tells the story of our main girl and main guy, but it's all in like storybook allegory type form, right? So it starts out and talks about, like, once upon a time, there's a girl that lived in this beautiful castle, and she had everything she could ever, desire materially, right? But she was also very lonely, and every day she'd sit on the balcony and she'd watch all the children from the village playing down below, right? And one day she decided she was tired of not having any friends. She wanted to go try to make friends with the village children. Problem is, she didn't know how. And she even tried giving them amazing gifts. And in the thing, she gives these kids this jewelry box. But when they open it, there's like a dead bird inside, because she's got antisocial personality disorder, right? So she doesn't really know how to connect to people at all. So the kids all see the bird and they all freak out and run, right? And then she's all sad because they didn't like her gift. But then it says, but the real reason nobody wanted to be her friend, which the girl didn't understand, is because there was a terrible monster that lived in her shadow. And it shows this monster come up out of her shadow. And it's almost like all these like stalks of corn, but with like eyes everywhere looking in all directions. And the girl decides not to go back to the castle. And she decides to go see the world, because she's never really left her home, right? But everywhere she goes, the monster is always there, always in her shadow, following behind her, through the mountains and across the plains. Doesn't matter, right? But then one day, she does something that surprises even her. She saves a boy from drowning. And since then, the boy starts following her. Over the mountains and across the plains, everywhere she goes, the boy's there with her. But what's most interesting is that when the boy shows up, the monster leaves. And so the boy and the girl are traveling together. They don't really talk. They're just kind of, she's always walking. He's always there behind her, right? But one night, they stop to rest, and the boy falls asleep, and the girl's sitting at his campfire, looking at the fire, and the monster comes back. And the monster starts to talk to her, and she's like, it's like, he's only with you because he's never seen the real you. You've been too afraid to show him who you really are. And if you ever did, he would leave you. And the girl's like, no, he wouldn't. He's my friend, and blah, 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 right? So they kind of argue back and forth. But the monster's like, well, then let's make a bet. You show him who you really are, and if he stays with you, then I will leave and I will never come back. But if he leaves, you have to come back with me to the cursed castle. And the girl's like, deal, because she, believes in her friend, and he'll never let her down, right? So in the morning, the boy wakes up, and he doesn't see the girl, but then he sees her on the top of this hill. And she's like standing there, way in the distance, looking back at him. So he gets up and he starts going over towards her, but then she starts leaving, and she starts running, trying to catch up to her. So finally he catches up to her, and she's got her back to him, right? So he comes up to her, and she turns around, and she's like, will you always stay with me no matter what I do? And he's like, yeah, of course. And she goes, even if I do this? And she holds up this butterfly by its wings, and she rips the wings off, and the butterfly falls on the ground. It's all like twitching, and the boy looks down, and he realizes they're standing on like this mound of twitching, writhing butterflies. And the boy like freaks out, and he looks at the girl, and her eyes turn like red, like they're on fire. And the boy screams and turns around and runs. And the girl just watches him, and at first she can't believe it, but then she just kind of hangs her head in defeat. And the monster comes back, and it picks her up all gently, and it carries her back to the castle, right? So then the final scene of the intro here, before the animation ends, it just has the girl, and she's standing on this balcony looking out over the night sky. And the monster's somewhere behind her. You don't see it, but you just hear it talking. And it's like, see, I told you he'd never understand you. I told you he'd never love you. No one will ever love you the way I do. You know that now, right? Don't you? And then the animation ends, and it just shows the actress standing on the balcony, and she just goes, yes, mother. And that's the end. And I was like, oh my goodness, the monster this entire time has been her mother. It was just one of the most amazing intros I'd ever seen in any television show. It was glorious. Anyways, that's basically it for the video. But yeah, Hotel de Luna, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. Queen of Tears, I'd put below the other two, but it was still really good. It does stretch on a little long towards the end. We get a few too many people almost dying of gunshots and brain tumors and poisonings and a bunch of other stuff too. But, whatever. It did have a lot of cool espionage stuff, which I liked a lot. But of the three, it was definitely the most rom-com-ish of the bunch, even though none of them are actually rom-coms, But they do have a lot of romance, and they have a lot of comedy. So, there is that. But then they also have other stuff. I think this is the thing that women don't understand about men and romance, though. If we have a good story and there's romance in it, men don't care. We just don't want the entire story to be the romance. If you got some kick-ass action hero and he beats the villains and saves the world and gets the girl, we're all like, yeah. It's like, how hot was the girl? Super hot. Yeah. That's all we care about. But it's like, so what's the story about? Oh, it's about their romance. Yeah, I'm just going to go play video games, I think. Yeah, there's got to be something there. We need more than just that. That's really the difference between men and women's viewing habits. Women don't need anything else. Anyways, so those are my thoughts. I feel like the girl boss trend is starting to come to an end, like the pendulum's starting to swing back. But we still are getting a lot of these shows, and I've seen very little to indicate that the writing is getting any better in Hollywood. They seem to finally be realizing that nobody likes it. They just haven't figured out how to fix that. But hopefully, hopefully videos like this will help get ideas out there, and people will be like, you know what? There are people who are doing it right. Maybe you can just take lessons from them. So anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. My next video is going to be an actual build video. I know, who would have thought we still do that on this channel, right? An actual Dungeons & Dragons build. I recently played a Halloween one-shot for level 6 characters, and I played a warlock, and it was awesome. And it was very Halloween inspired and themed. So my next video is going to be talking about that character. Anyways, that is everything for this video. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I still read every comment. I said every comic. Every comment. Obviously, I don't make as many videos these days, but, whatever. I still enjoy doing them, so hopefully people still watch them. And no matter what, I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.